And I always want people to know that, yes, lifestyle is really powerful, but it's not your fault if you've got PCOS. It has a really strong genetic and environmental link. And the environment we're living in is so different to what it was before. Even microplastics, endocrine disruptors in our perfumes or makeup products. So just looking at all of those things and thinking about how can I strip things back? How can I support myself? Just really trying to treat ourselves like we would our best friends.
Welcome back to the Health Review podcast, part of thehealthreview.com, your go-to source for all things health and wellness. I'm your host, Emily Rose Adams. Today we're diving into hormonal health and a topic that affects millions of women worldwide but is often misunderstood or even overlooked: polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS. My guest today is the incredible Rohini Bajekal, a nutritionist, board-certified lifestyle medicine professional, and the co-author of Living PCOS Free. Rohini has dedicated her career to helping people take control of their hormonal health through evidence-based nutrition and lifestyle changes. In this episode, Rohini shares her own experience with PCOS, breaking down the key steps to identifying it, and reveals how nutrition and lifestyle can make a huge difference in managing symptoms. So whether you have PCOS, suspect you might, or just want to learn more about hormonal health, this conversation is packed with insights that you won't want to miss. Let's welcome Rohini to the Health Review. Rohini, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're probably super busy seeing clients, and I know you've done a lot of sort of national TV appearances and podcasts and lots of press. So I'm sure you're really busy. So thank you for taking the time to come on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me, Emily. It's really exciting to be here, and also to hear that you kind of want to share more about hormonal health and well-being with all your listeners. So yeah, thrilled to be here.
Now, I would like to kind of talk about different areas of hormonal health, but I wanted to tell you that I have been reading your book, Living PCOS Free, which you co-wrote with your mum, which is amazing. I've never heard of a collaboration with a mother and daughter on something like this before.
Oh yeah, my mum and I, we do make a good team. So my mum's a gynecologist. She's had like over 40 years experience in the NHS and working with patients who've got PCOS, endometriosis, fibroids, pregnancy issues. She's been doing this for her whole career.
Amazing to have your mum to be able to help with this stuff.
Totally. I think when I was growing up, my friends are always like, oh, I wish I had a gynecologist as a mum. I've just got so many questions. So that's part of the reason why we wrote the book, was to kind of share her wisdom with so many women that don't get access to this. As you probably heard, like NHS waiting times are now over 3 years for a gynecologist, I believe. So you've got to wait a really long time to see someone with her level of experience. So I think books, podcasts, videos, they're all just such a good way of kind of getting that information across. And I obviously bring my nutrition and lifestyle medicine expertise to that. So we kind of form this blend where we look at things really holistically, but with an evidence-based lens. And sometimes that's what's missing, I think, in wellness. You've got the sort of scientific side, and you've got researchers, PhDs, medical doctors, and you've got the other side. Sometimes you've got influencers and other kind of advocates, but neither side are talking to each other. So it's about bringing together both sides and realizing that actually we need to make it digestible and have really good takeaways. As you've seen in the book, we kind of have these top tips and myth busters to make it a really complex topic a lot easier to access.
It's really good. I feel like everyone should read it, whether you have PCOS, if you so many people, I guess, are undiagnosed. So there'd be a lot of people who might read the book and actually realize I have more of the symptoms than I thought. If you've got family with PCOS, it's good to read it. It's a great read because it's informative. It kind of goes to the basics as well about periods and general hormone health. You have helped a lot with all the recipes. There's some really fantastic recipes, lifestyle recommendations. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I'm going to keep reading it. And it's definitely made me think myself, just, okay, that's curious, because I might have a couple of the symptoms, but I'm not sure if I'm actually sort of full PCOS. And I'm curious to know, actually, with this topic, is there a spectrum when it comes to PCOS? Like, are there people who obviously get diagnosed, it's very clear, but then there are other people who might just have issues with their androgen levels who might not have full PCOS, but is there kind of a spectrum?
Totally. So maybe we should just say what kind of PCOS is, because it can be such a complex condition to unravel. PCOS, or polycystic ovary syndrome, sometimes it's called polycystic ovary disorder in different parts of the world, but PCOS for short. affects at least 1 in 10 women, trans men, or non-binary people. So it's really high, and the prevalence can be a lot higher. It can be up to 20% in some groups. So in certain ethnic groups, such as Asian, such as myself, or in women living with larger bodies, or those living who've got subfertility or they're struggling to conceive. So it's really common. I'm so happy you said that, Emily, that this book and generally knowing about PCOS is something that's important for everyone, because whether you've got PCOS, I can guarantee that you will know someone in your life, whether it's your friend, your sister, your neighbor, your employee, your colleague at work, someone around you that you care about has PCOS, and they're more likely than not to be undiagnosed. 75% don't yet have a diagnosis. So in terms of what it is, it's a hormonal condition, an endocrine condition. That means it affects the endocrine system. So it can really be thought of, and it was going to be renamed as a reproductive metabolic condition. It means it affects all these different parts of the body. It's often just sort of labeled as, oh, it's just a gynae issue, but it's not. It affects your reproductive health, your mental health. It's a whole body condition. And it affects how your ovaries function. So that can have a range of symptoms. And you're totally right that you could be kind of having some of the symptoms, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got PCOS. So, for example, one of the common symptoms due to the high androgen levels, the most common androgen of which is testosterone, you might see things like cystic acne. And of course, lots of us get acne, and sometimes even cystic acne when we're adults. And it can be due to so many things. It can be due to inflammation, due to kind of perhaps having certain food intolerances, such as a dairy intolerance. It could be due to so many different reasons, even a skincare product. That doesn't necessarily mean you have PCOS. So to be diagnosed with PCOS, you've got to have 2 out of 3 of the Rotterdam criteria. And there's a slightly different criteria for teenagers. You don't tend to rush to diagnose teenagers quite as quickly. But when you're an adult, you need to have 2 out of 3 of the Rotterdam criteria. So the first one is absent or irregular cycles. So typically the hallmark in PCOS is you'll see these long cycles. You'll be like, I don't really know when my period's coming. They might be coming every 55, 60, 90 days. Sometimes in some women, they're just not coming at all. And then another kind of symptom is the biochemical or clinical signs. So in a nutshell, that means you might see things like high testosterone or altered LH-FSH ratio on blood tests. I know that all sounds really complex, but we walk you through it in the book because there are all these different blood tests that you can do, and clinical symptoms within that category. So you might be totally normal on blood tests, such as I was normal on blood tests, but or when I say I didn't have signs of PCOS on a blood test, but I had the clinical signs. So clinical signs of high androgen levels, and the hallmark of those are really 3 things. It could be scalp hair loss, often called male pattern hair loss. I don't really like that term. I think it's quite stigmatizing, and it's already stressful enough to have hair loss, but it will kind of be on this sort of area. Cystic acne that's on the jawline, and it's really persistent in adulthood. And then the third symptom would be excess facial or body hair, which obviously can be really distressing in a patriarchal society, because women are expected to have really thick, luscious hair on their head and no hair anywhere else. And obviously just be, I would say, like smooth like a dolphin.
Yeah.
So that's the second criteria. And the third criteria are polycystic ovaries on an ultrasound. And it looks like a pearl necklace when you do an ultrasound, because you have loads of these immature follicles. It's really annoying that it's called polycystic ovaries, because they're not true ovarian cysts. They're these immature follicles that don't reach maturation. So that results in delayed or anovulation. If you're not ovulating, obviously it's really hard to get pregnant. You need to be ovulating regularly, ideally every month. And ovulation, sort of the star of the show when it comes to your menstrual cycle. It's responsible for your metabolism, your bone health. It's very, very important to be ovulating, unless you're on hormonal birth control or you're pregnant or breastfeeding or you don't have periods because you're in the menopause, for example. So those are the 3 criteria, but 1 in 4 young women have polycystic ovaries. That doesn't necessarily mean they've got polycystic ovary syndrome. They've got to have one of the other 2 criteria. And the criteria is more heavily weighted towards number 2. So if you've got irregular periods and you've got polycystic ovaries, you can't immediately say, oh, you've definitively got polycystic ovary syndrome. You do meet 2 of the criteria, but I would look a bit deeper, because sometimes people do get misdiagnosed. For example, you might have an eating disorder where you're under eating and you've got missing periods for that reason. You don't have the signs of high androgen levels, that you may have polycystic ovaries because you're quite young. So I think it's important to get a full clinical picture. In my practice, I ask so many questions, practically down to kind of if you are living with a pet, how many hours a day you spend looking at screens. And that gives me a really good sense of your overall lifestyle. And taking that full history is really important. So you're totally right. Just having one criteria, a few chin hairs, doesn't necessarily mean you've got PCOS. I think sometimes it's important to remember we are all supposed to have, imperfections with our skin, or as you could say, just variations in these things. And PCOS is something that, yes, 75% of women are undiagnosed, but we need to be careful before we make a diagnosis for anything. We need to get it right, and we need to look at the whole picture.
But 75%, gosh, what a crazy number that is. That really makes you think that there will be a lot of people out there right now struggling and they wouldn't even know. And I guess getting that diagnosis is the crucial point here. It's kind of putting the pieces together, hearing information like this. I think even sometimes when you go and see a GP, it might be, well, your periods are okay, just go on the pill for a while, or, try and sort of, manage your stress or whatever. So I feel like getting that diagnosis is really difficult for some people. Would you say that the ultrasound is the kind of the real way to firm up a diagnosis?
I would say it's actually considered the least important criteria in a sense, because as I mentioned, so many young women do have polycystic ovaries. You've got to get a good evaluation by your doctor. A good GP can diagnose you or refer you to a specialist if they need. But it's important to consider also family history. So do you have a mother or sister or, other female relatives who've struggled with irregular cycles? Do you have type 2 diabetes in your family, perhaps a parent with type 2 diabetes or even pre-diabetes? Do you have those signs of insulin resistance, which is the driver of PCOS symptoms in about 70% of cases? So insulin resistance is when your body can't really process and metabolize carbohydrates as effectively, and it's as a result of that intracellular fat. You've got fat in places that you don't really want it. So it's not about the subcutaneous fat that we might have, but it's the fat around the organs, such as in the liver. And that means that when you eat food that contains carbohydrates, whether it's a bowl of black beans or a sweet potato or a donut, your pancreas releases insulin, and the cells become resistant to that insulin. That happens in all of us. If you've been lying in bed for 3 days not moving, you'll be more insulin resistant. If you've had a poor night's sleep, you'll be more insulin resistant. But in PCOS, that insulin resistance is a real hallmark of a lot of those characteristics of the acne, sugar cravings, weight gain, particularly around the stomach area, feeling sort of thirsty, hangry, all of these sorts of signs of insulin resistance. You can have things like darkening of the skin and the groin and under the armpits. There's so many different signs of insulin resistance. So if that sounds like something you're dealing with, if you're really finding it difficult to kind of maintain your weight, because whilst 20% of those with PCOS are not in larger bodies, 80% are, and weight can be a real struggle. And it's so often the focus, which really is sad to see, rather than focusing on what are the changes that we can make. Can we bring in things like, meditation, mindfulness? Can we focus on what we add into the diet, more fiber, more colourful plant foods? Can we focus on those things rather than trying to always subtract rather than add? So yeah, I think you're totally right. It's devastating that 3 and 4 are sort of walking around not knowing that all these symptoms are linked. And we talk about this in the book. You might go and see a dermatologist because you're really struggling with your skin. You might go and talk to your GP about your irregular periods. You might go and book a PT session because you're struggling with your weight and, not feeling fit. So I think that there's so many different reasons why it takes such a long time. And I think part of it comes down to that basic education about periods. So many women don't realize what is a sort of normal period. Periods are not supposed to be, really painful. That can be a sign of endometriosis. You can have PCOS and endometriosis together, of course, as well. But yeah, just to kind of say, I think you're so right. There's so many people that are just not getting a diagnosis and not getting heard. And that is really, really sad.
And you're seeing a lot of clients coming into you, I'm guessing, with some of these symptoms. You've experienced it yourself, which I'm sure really helps, because you can sort of empathize, and you felt it yourself, so you know what they're going through. But what are some of the challenges that some of your clients will be facing when they come in? Obviously, you've mentioned weight gain and acne, but psychologically, over a long period of time, what can that do to you?
I think the world that we live in, which, as I mentioned, we have these expectations which are so unfair around beauty standards, and it can be really difficult if you don't meet those beauty standards. And I think PCOS does make people feel unworthy. It's been shown to impact body image. It's linked to disordered eating. It can impact, your ability to show up in maybe at work or in your relationships. In fact, it's linked to sexual and relationship dysfunction because of this. So I think it's really hard to be able to tease out exactly how much is due to those high androgen levels versus the societal standards that we expect of people, which are just so unfair, really. And so I think that I always try and remember what I went through. It was at university when I first noticed those symptoms of PCOS really spring up. And I think it's because my lifestyle had had a radical shift from when I was younger. I was, classic university lifestyle, not much fiber, lots of kind of more ultra processed foods, late nights, binge drinking, nothing really extreme, but definitely classic university lifestyle. And I noticed that my skin was just so inflamed. I was incredibly anxious, which we know is a symptom of PCOS. I often couldn't leave my bedroom for days. I would just feel sick to my stomach with anxiety. My hair was falling out. And during finals, which was a particularly stressful time, that's when it really took hold. It was actually my hairdresser who was like, "You're losing a lot of hair. Do you think you've got PCOS?" So my mum had pointed it out as well. But obviously I was like, when you're 19, 20, the last person you want to listen to is your mum.
Yes.
So you're like, oh, okay. And it took many more years before I got a formal diagnosis. I think part of it was I hadn't really struggled with the weight aspect. So I just didn't think that could be me, because I didn't really realize that PCOS can take so many different forms. And actually, it's not the same in every person. You've got to look at the individual. And as I said, there's so many different manifestations of the condition. So I didn't really relate it to that. So when I talk to my clients, I always tell them, look, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to feel alone and not understand why your body is letting you down. But the mental health aspect is enormous. And we know that there are lots of mental health conditions related to hormonal health issues like PCOS. So in PCOS, there's a higher risk of things like anxiety, low mood and depression, even suicidal thoughts, obsessive compulsive disorder, disordered eating, and eating disorders, especially binge eating disorder without purging. So often those androgens like testosterone, we know that they're actually appetite stimulating. So you might find that you open something like a bag of crisps and you just cannot stop, or chocolate, you get these primal cravings. And of course, these foods are designed to be hyper palatable, irresistible, easy to overconsume, addictive. There's been a lot of talk about kind of ultra processed foods, but I think for someone with PCOS living within our food environment, it can be really challenging.
And do you think that there's also an element of, slight, I wouldn't say embarrassment, but an uncomfortable feeling with words like, well, testosterone we would think is more male linked, male pattern baldness, hair on the face, having those kind of symptoms also it's not easy to talk about, is it? To go to the doctors and say, like, I've got male pattern baldness and I'm growing hair on my face. Like it's really uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of women.
I think it's just so tragic that we use these terms, and this exists throughout medicine and other areas as well. I think it's stigmatizing, alienating, it causes so much depersonalization, and I think the medical establishment have got to change some of this language and terminology, even around things like, the fat phobia that's sort of rife and endemic in kind of the way that we talk about bodies. So I think that it's incredibly, exactly as you said, it's really difficult for people to go and say these things. And I think a lot of it is also lack of understanding, because testosterone is necessary for all genders. All genders have testosterone and estrogen, and men need some estrogen too, just like women need some testosterone. In fact, it's sometimes given as a kind of hormone replacement in the menopause for women. So I think education around hormones in general and hormonal health is helpful, but I think avoiding using those terms like male pattern baldness and just labeling someone with infertility, but sort of asking them how they would like to discuss it, and using factual terms like scalp hair loss or excess facial hair. And by the way, excess facial and body hair, it's whatever the person decides is too much. So if the person feels that's excessive or that's too much for me, that's what's important. It's the same with heavy periods. You get to decide if your period's heavy. There's no some sort of random kind of benchmark. You get to decide it and how much it's affecting your quality of life. But definitely, I think there's no perfect solution to a lot of these things, and people with PCOS can spend, I would say, thousands of pounds trying to deal with these things: electrolysis, laser, beauty treatments, seeing nutritionists and dietitians and personal trainers and everything. And those are the ones who can access it. There's many more who are just struggling with so many at-home treatments that can do damage, and unproven supplements, unfortunately, that are touted by people on TikTok and things. There's great information online, and I'm on social media. I love to share tips and content on social media, but I think you've got to be careful as well, because anything that looks like a magic bullet, trust me, I probably tried them all myself. There's no quick fix for things like PCOS. There's no cure for PCOS, and I think that upsets people. In Living PCOS Free, we try and emphasize that whilst there's no cure, it's about living joyfully, it's living your best life, and you can still manage your symptoms really well through lifestyle changes. In fact, that's the first line of treatment, and that's true for so many health conditions. Lifestyle can play a really powerful role with reducing insulin resistance and reversing it in the early stages, and helping to normalize a lot of those symptoms. So clearing your skin, getting your periods regular. And I think those are much healthier goals to focus on, like how regular is your cycle, how are you feeling in yourself, rather than focusing on the number on the scale or things that are not really in your control.
I think also that is quite empowering as well, because if you are able to do something yourself, although you don't want to follow these kind of miracle cures that people are promoting online, knowing that there are lifestyle things that you can do and change is possible, I think is quite an empowering feeling. And I think when you realize and you see the results, a lot of us have made drastic lifestyle changes when we've needed to. You got out of that phase, I'm sure, when you went to you actually write in the book that you moved to, was it Mumbai you went, and you saw your symptoms improve because you changed various things about your lifestyle. So I think when you realize yourself that change actually is possible, because I think it's easy, especially if you've got the mental health side effects of something like PCOS or a hormonal imbalance, it's quite easy to get stuck in a rut for a long time, and you almost feel trapped, like there's no way of improving this. So I think just trying some of these lifestyle changes, if possible, is definitely a good step. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying today's episode, please do subscribe or give it a follow so we can keep giving you excellent content and bringing on amazing guests that hopefully you're loving on the Health Review podcast. Now back to the show. You mentioned there's potential myths online. There is a lot of content now. Clickbaity stuff that's going very viral. So I actually have some PCOS related questions or statements that I found online. And I was curious to ask you whether there's any truth to them or whether they're sort of just complete myths. So if you don't mind.
Is it a quick fire?
It's a quick, we don't have to go too fast. We can be relaxed. But you actually mentioned already, I was going to ask, is the claim that you can cure PCOS with diet true? Well, you've just said there is no real cure, but
diet can, what you put on your plate 3 times a day, sometimes more, it plays a profound role in normalizing insulin resistance and also helping to manage PCOS. And so often, it's something that we're not looking at. 8 in 10 of us in the UK are not meeting the fibre recommendations. So at least 8 in 10. So we've got a long way to go when it comes to getting more of those nutritious foods on our plate. So it can play a really big role.
And in terms of the insulin resistance, is it true that PCOS is actually driven by the insulin resistance?
In most people with PCOS, yes, most of the symptoms are driven by insulin resistance. There are different pathways in PCOS, and not everyone with PCOS has insulin resistance. It's not entirely easy. It's not that easy sometimes to work out whether some people have insulin resistance, but it's just a little bit harder to detect, especially in that sort of so-called lean PCOS that I mentioned. But there are different tests that you can do, and as I mentioned, there are those common signs of insulin resistance to look out for. But there are, I think inflammation and insulin resistance often characterize a lot of PCOS symptoms.
The supplement inositol, I think you mentioned it briefly. There's a lot of claims going on about that supplement. and these different brands, you know, releasing, and I'm pretty sure that I don't think you're allowed to actually say it cures PCOS, but I think their marketing teams are very clever where they sort of word it around where it's still sort of within regulation. But I mean, can it really?
So it's quite a promising supplement. It doesn't work for everyone. And what's interesting, so in myo-inositol or inositol hexaphosphate naturally occurs in plant foods. So you find it in beans and fruits and vegetables. And it's true that women with PCOS appear to have lower levels, and it can really help some women with PCOS, helping to kind of normalize their cycle and to, especially if they're trying to conceive and things. It doesn't work for everyone though. And without those lifestyle changes that I mentioned, again, it doesn't need to be all or nothing, but, you know, moving your body regularly, getting enough sleep, those are really important. I think the clue is in the term supplement. A supplement is there to kind of complement your lifestyle, supplement it. It can't replace. So if you're sleeping 4 hours a night and you're eating McDonald's every day, it's myo-inositol is not going to get your cycle back. It's there to kind of support everything else you're doing. And I've definitely had some clients who've seen great results on it, but I do think some of the marketing has been a bit over the top. And it can, you know, really work for some people who find that metformin, which is an insulin sensitizing agent, it's used off-label for PCOS. You've probably heard of it kind of being used for people who've got type 2 diabetes.
And for people who want to age slower.
Yeah, that's super high doses, the biohackers, what they're taking.
Yeah.
But certainly, you know, some people do get gastrointestinal symptoms on metformin, so myo-inositol can be an alternative. Some take both together, but again, that should be a discussion that you have with your doctor. What is important to mention is that over half of all women with PCOS who are carrying excess weight in several studies have been shown to develop type 2 diabetes by the time they're 40. So over half will develop type 2 diabetes, and insulin resistance, if untreated, can progress to pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes, which is of course a very serious condition with a lot of comorbidities, a lot of really, really unpleasant side effects, whether it's things like limb amputations, cataracts, you know, early death. So it's something that is really important to get a grip on as early as we can.
But, you know, thanks to people like you sharing this information, it's becoming more sort of widely known about these risks. So thank you for sharing that. With PCOS, is it true that you can have it but not have any cysts? Or not cysts, the
immature egg follicles. Yes, because you would have the first and second criteria. So you could have irregular or absent periods and also those clinical and biochemical signs, but maybe on an ultrasound you're not showing those immature egg follicles. You only need to have 2 out of 3. I actually have all 3 criteria.
I'm sorry.
Which makes the diagnosis easy, but I think some people don't. So just important to look at that criteria and obviously to see a medical professional for that.
I've heard that some people with PCOS get much worse PMS. Is that true?
I don't think there's been too much research on it, but it makes sense because of those hormonal fluctuations and generally, as I mentioned, the low mood that's associated with PCOS. You could get this premenstrual exacerbation. Sort of, it's 8 out of 10 people who have periods have PMS, so it's really common. That means 8 in 10 are getting some of that bloating and water retention and moodiness and irritability and kind of sugar cravings. And
some people, you know, don't get that.
Fatigue.
I'm so jealous.
I know. So it's quite normal. Obviously, there's a really severe end of it called PMDD, which people are talking about a lot more. But certainly, lifestyle changes, again, are going to support you. And even nutrition tips, like making sure that you are supporting yourself with complex carbohydrates, because your body really needs that around ovulation and afterwards, but throughout the month, really. But things like, you know, sweet potato and quinoa and wild rice, and getting in lots of dark leafy greens that are rich in iron, and things like cashew nuts and dried apricots and lentils, so those iron-rich foods, and making sure that you're getting lots of movement and fresh air. All of that can really help. And there are other things like vitamin B6, which have also been shown to potentially help with PMS symptoms. But yeah, it's kind of looking at the whole picture of lifestyle, of the lifestyle pillars, not just one.
And my last one was going to be, I've heard that you can have PCOS and still have regular periods, but I guess, yes, that's correct, because as you said, it might just be you have the other the other symptoms, but your periods
Absolutely.
are
Yeah,
normal.
you can. If they're kind of bang on 28-day cycles, I would look a bit closer to be like, okay, maybe the person is managing their PCOS really well. Often, if you take a history, they'll say, yes, actually, when I was in my 20s and I had a really hectic lifestyle, I was in the city and I often, my periods would go missing, and I was eating at 11 o'clock at night, and I didn't have a regular routine. But now they're really good, and now I exercise regularly and I go to bed at 10 p.m. every day. I'm like, okay, you're managing your PCOS really well. So your periods can absolutely be regular. And I found that when I made those lifestyle changes, it was such a relief to see my periods come back like clockwork and things. So yeah, it's totally possible.
And there was another mention in your book, which I know obviously it will be true. I hadn't heard this before, that men can display some sort of PCOS type symptoms, which sounds crazy, but
yeah, it was a study that was done in Oxford in 2020, so around the pandemic, and they looked at a really large group of men and found that they had symptoms of PCOS, like the hair loss and the abdominal weight gain, and often found that they had women in their families who had PCOS, like mothers and sisters. And I think there's more research that's still to be done in this area. But what's quite interesting is that if you've got men in your family who are displaying those characteristics of that insulin resistance and hair loss and diabetes and weight gain around the center, then you might be more likely to have PCOS. And of course, it can be carried through the male part of the family as well. Your father may have been the person that passed that on to you. So it's super interesting. It's not really just considered a condition that affects only the ovaries now. It's really considered a kind of much broader picture, which is why research and scientific research is so exciting. We need a lot more research into women's health, and I hope that kind of raising awareness of this does drive it. There are some amazing researchers out there, of course.
This is so interesting because, I mean, when I was younger at school and stuff, I'd had a couple of friends who weren't getting periods and got acne, and basically were like, oh, there's cysts on your ovaries, put you on the pill, everything will be fine. And like, no one really knew anything more than that. So I guess this is really interesting that we're getting kind of more.
The pill is a powerful treatment for PCOS, despite a lot of the fear mongering online. The pill has have helped so many women since like the 1970s to not have to be able to plan and time pregnancies, which of course was such a big cause of death during childbirth, but also still goes on around the world now. So I think it's a fantastic thing, but I think that we need to have discussions about things like endometriosis and PCOS at an early age, so women can identify if they've got some of those challenges. And the pill can work really well at kind of helping some of those symptoms to be kind of calmed or put into remission, but it doesn't cure PCOS. Of course, there is no, as I mentioned, there's no cure for it, but one size doesn't fit all. It's not suitable for everyone. That's why you always need to have individualized discussions.
It does feel like the pill's been demonized in the last few years in particular.
Totally.
In the book, you mentioned a lot about plant-based food. You've been on a plant-based diet mostly, I'm guessing, for like 20
pretty
years
much
or
my
so?
whole life, but since more 100% plant-based for sort of the last 23 years.
Wow.
But it was not always the way that it is now. And of course, just because something is plant-based doesn't automatically make it healthy. So when I was at university, it might have been sort of accidentally vegan, but it was a lot more kind of the bourbon biscuits and sugary kind of caramel plant milk frappes or things like that, chips. All of those are vegan, but not necessarily whole food plant-based. And I shifted to eating a lot more fiber, a lot more colorful plants. So I always say to people, it's not about a label. You don't have to label yourself pescatarian, vegan, vegetarian, whatever it is, but just try to focus on bringing color to your plate. Not everyone is going to eat in the same way, but getting in more fiber, getting more fruit, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts and seeds, and then water or herbal teas and things like that as your drink of choice. Try and stay away from too much alcohol. It's super inflammatory for PCOS and can worsen a lot of those hormonal health issues. Definitely awful for PMS. So I think plants are just so powerful. Firstly, they have fiber, which is super important for regulating hormonal health, because when we are constipated, that our poo traps a lot of estrogen. So actually,
so interesting.
Yeah, making sure that you are getting rid of that through regular bowel movements is really important. And of course, fiber does a wonderful job of doing that. But also fruit. Fruit has been so demonized as being full of sugar, but fruit is sort of nature's perfect package. It comes with fiber, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and the whole food matrix means it's very different to eat an orange versus having a glass of orange juice where the fiber's been removed. And you could easily have, a glass of orange juice that has the same kind of sugar content as 6 oranges, and you could drink that in 30 seconds. Whereas if I gave you 6 oranges to eat, I mean, I don't know how long we have for the podcast.
I'm sure I could get through it eventually.
you'd be munching away. So fruit is actually really powerful for reducing insulin resistance. In fact, we know that the more fruit you eat, the better. We don't just want to eat one food, though. I'm not a fan of like mono meals or anything like that. We want to have a variety of foods in the diet. So getting a range of colourful foods then is really, really important. And I'm a big fan of legumes because they are so packed with fiber. They contain protein, iron, calcium, so many other nutrients. So particularly lentils, beans, tofu, soya foods are really fantastic for PCOS. They've been shown in certain studies to improve ovulation rates. So I love to get tofu, tempeh, edamame, beans like in my diet. Quite different to like a soya sausage, which you might have at a barbecue or something, but most of the time I try and stick to whole or minimally processed plant foods. And I love baking, so I'll bake things with dates, or I make homemade banana bread. And it's important to not demonize food or think, oh, I should be afraid of that. There can be a lot of that with PCOS because you're afraid of, spiking your sugar. And there's this big craze now around blood glucose monitoring and wearing a CGM even when you don't have diabetes. And I think it's important to say that if you're eating an overall wholesome dietary pattern that is rich in these foods, then you definitely have space for fun foods like that slice of chocolate cake at your friend's birthday. It's not going to derail everything, but it's just important to do it mindfully and develop that positive relationship with food, because I love food and it needs to be a joyful thing. And I think once you start fearing it, it can be such a slippery slope. And it's around us all the time, these sorts of messaging. And unfortunately with PCOS, you can feel very, very much kind of that it's your fault, that's some of the rhetoric that's out there. And I always want people to know that, yes, lifestyle is really powerful, but it's not your fault if you've got PCOS. It has a really strong genetic and environmental link. And in fact, it's interesting because the environment we're living in is so different to what it was before. Even microplastics, endocrine disruptors in our perfumes or makeup products. So just looking at all of those things and thinking about how can I strip things back? How can I support myself? Just really trying to treat ourselves like we would our best friend, as cheesy as it sounds.
That sounds good. Like, I think we need to love ourselves and take good care of ourselves.
Totally.
And I'm guessing, so when someone comes to you with any kind of hormone imbalance or suspected, you'll be working quite strongly on diet and working on that. And I think for some people, going to plant-based might seem quite frightening. And, there's been a lot of sort of narrative around, iron coming from meat and, calcium coming from other, sort of animal-based products. So do you ever recommend to try and ease that anxiety, but also just for your client to sort of do testing? Because perhaps, like, for instance, I've been very heavily plant-based for a long time now, and I've done a few blood tests along the way to check my calcium, vitamin D, everything, because I think it does just reassure you that, that narrative has been so strong throughout our lives that actually you do sort of second guess it sometimes and think, are these chickpeas and beans and are they really providing me with the same kind of quality of nutrients that animal products would? Do you recommend doing that kind of testing?
I recommend a few kind of key tests. I'm not a huge fan of unnecessary testing, unnecessary supplements. My approach is very much a food first approach. I'm sure I'd make a fortune if I launched a supplement. Not a fortune, but it's really important for people to realize that so much stuff in terms of getting healthy can be accessed. And unfortunately, we live in a world where healthy food is not always accessible to everyone. Green spaces are not. There's so many different social determinants of health that impact that. So I don't want that to come across. But I think getting to the point that I focus on what people can add into their diet, so making it really easy to digest. I will say that with testing, one issue that I've noticed is that people will say they'll do veganuary or they'll go plant-based and they'll do a test a month later and they're like, oh, I have to stop being plant-based. My iron's low, my vitamin D is low, my B12 is low. And I said, hang on, you've been plant-based for a month. This has been building up for years.
Plus it's January, there's no sun, vitamin D.
It takes about 5 years for a B12 deficiency to develop.
Wow.
So it's really important to take supplements. And if you're plant-based, you should be taking B12. 1 in 4 people who eat meat and other animal products are deficient in B12 as well. But vitamin D is something that the government recommends all of us should be taking at this time of year. If you've got darker melanated skin like me, you definitely want to be taking it year round. And obviously in PCOS, you're more likely to be deficient with vitamin D, so taking a high dose might be prudent. But you're right that sometimes it can be reassuring. But say something like calcium, the body actually regulates calcium really well. It needs to be at a homeostasis. It's quite scary if you've got low calcium levels. So it's not an indicator of how much you're getting in your diet when you do a calcium test. My dad's an orthopedic spinal surgeon, so he sort of explained that to me, and I was like, that makes so much sense. This is like, back in the day. So definitely getting things like vitamin D and B12 and stuff looked at, but really what's most important is to take those key supplements and focus on your nutrition and lifestyle. Even things like, whilst checking your ferritin and your hemoglobin can be helpful if you've got things like heavy periods, I'd say focus on what you can add in. So your tofu, your lentils, your dark leafy greens, particularly the low oxalate kinds like your bok choy and your pak choy and your rocket leaves and things like that. And I love dates and dried apricots. You shouldn't be afraid of kind of foods that also have fat in them, like nuts. They're really a really fantastic source of nutrition. So I try and make it digestible, just simple things. I don't talk about plant-based or, certain ways. What I look at is, okay, what are you currently having for breakfast? And if they're not having anything for breakfast, my first goal is to get them to start having something for breakfast. And that can be a big issue in itself, because PCOS is characterized by that sort of circadian rhythm dysfunction, which means that our body's internal clock is sort of wonky. So you'll find that you can often be like a night owl if you've got PCOS. You're tired during the day and wired at night. And so little things like giving up blue light for a few hours before you go to bed, and really getting to a good routine with having some food for breakfast, we know that can really help your metabolic health. So it doesn't need to be massive. If someone's struggling with that appetite, I might recommend a smoothie or a plant yogurt with some seeds. But I do start my day with porridge and get all the trimmings on it. So just focusing on what you can add in. Like the first week, I might say, could you have rolled oats and soy milk and blueberries? The next week I might add in some ground flaxseed or hemp seeds, then add in, a diverse mix of different fruits. So it's about building up those habits and working on that kind of habit change rather than just going from 0 to 100. And I prefer not to talk about those labels, but focus on what are the snacks that you have. If they're like, I love crunchy food, I really want to have, I love corn puffs and I love crisps and stuff like that, I'll say, how about some roasted chickpeas or roasted edamame beans or homemade popcorn? That can give you that satisfying texture. So I think your cravings can actually be a powerful thing and something that you shouldn't ignore, but it's about working with them. And I think if you're satisfying yourself at meals, it's going to really help as well. So balancing your plate, making sure that you're building your meals around nutrient-dense foods, then having the occasional treat or fun food isn't going to do anything. It's not going to derail anything, and it's going to make your life more joyful. And you're going to be able to trust yourself more around things like chocolates and sweet foods and stuff, which is a big issue I see that women have, is that a lot of times it's that influence of diet culture and I can't have that, or I really should be good. Telling yourself those things can make it a lot harder actually.
There's a new term, I think it's like flexitarian or something,
Exactly.
where you're not religiously like, I am never having meat again.
I think it's people have to work out what it is for them, and I support my clients wherever they're at, but I do focus on getting more of those plants in because I find that it really benefits them. But yeah, if they're hard on themselves, it's going to make it really hard. And certainly if someone's got any element of disordered eating, I always work to improve their relationship with food, and saying you can't have this and you can't have that is not going to be, that's going to be really counterintuitive and really different to the way that I work. So I don't support that demonization of foods. I think I try to explain why something is so beneficial and how to bring it into the diet without it feeling like you've got no options. I think you've got to focus on that abundance and that diversity of options that you've got out there.
And I think once you find that formula of like, oh, I've kind of cracked what works for me. Or if you do make those lifestyle changes and you start getting used to sort of cooking with new things and it becomes more natural. And then suddenly, like, because I've been through my own, journeys along with this, with diet. And I think sometimes when you finally work out, oh, that's what I need. I'm not starving, because the worst thing is if you do have a sweet tooth and perhaps if you do have some sort of insulin resistance and you're inclined to sort of, especially at night, crave a dessert. If you find sort of a meal, a dinner that really sort of ticks all the boxes for you personally, you notice these cravings sort of disappearing over time.
Your taste buds can really change. And I think it's really, you've got to give people that encouragement that, it's, and finding things that they enjoy. Exactly as you said, our body, we have this sort of innate wisdom, but we don't listen to ourselves because of years of conditioning. But if you look at babies who are being weaned, they instinctively know when they're full. And a lot of, we were all born with that, but we lose that along the way. So a lot of it is kind of tuning back into those hunger and fullness signals and supporting ourselves. Nutrition is just one aspect though. So I always look at more broadly, because I have had clients before where they're sort of like, I eat the perfect diet and they're ticking all those nutrient dense boxes, but then they tell me they're sleeping 5 hours a night because they wake up at 6 to meal prep and go to the gym. And I think, okay, well, you're missing out on your social life, you're missing out on your community and spending time with friends and having a laugh and, maybe just cooking together or going out for a meal. So you've got to bring that in and you've got to bring in that rest. It's not healthy to be at Barry's boot camp every morning, kind of really raising your cortisol levels and adrenaline levels and working out on an empty stomach, which we know is can really quite detrimental to female hormonal health across the cycle. So it's really key to kind of get those messages across to people. I think that it's, as you said, it's not all or nothing. It's just those simple tips and just helping them to kind of see that maybe zooming out is going to be the thing that they need, looking at maybe their sleep, their stress, their time with friends. Are they perhaps having one too many glasses of wine in the evening to de-stress? Could they de-stress in another way? Are there other things that they find relaxing? Could be cuddling their dog or watching a good film or journaling or going to a sound bath. It can be so many things that, not different strokes for different folks, I always say.
Definitely. I think it's just, you have to try and make those changes, but maybe, yes, bit by bit, not personality transplant overnight. So
and tapping into what you find joyful. I always ask people, like, what did you love doing when you were a child? When was the last time you really enjoyed playing? What made it feel good? Oh, I used to love skipping. Let's get the skipping rope and skip. You hate going to the gym. Skip in front of YouTube for 5 minutes or skip along to your favorite, Taylor Swift or Ariana Grande. Like, I think it's just bringing that joy in can be really, really helpful. And I think that losing that was definitely something I experienced in my PCOS journey, was just sort of not feeling joyful, feeling there was a lot of pressure on all of these different things, and actually looking at those other areas of my life and kind of filling my cup through spending time with friends and changing things up. So instead of grabbing a coffee and cake with a friend and just sitting down for hours talking, we'd get a hot drink instead. Sometimes I'd get, like a turmeric latte or something like that and walk around the park and then go and get a meal together. So you'd get that movement in, you get that natural light, and that would make me feel so much better. So just changing up in these little ways can make a huge difference.
That's
habit
amazing.
Stacking, really.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like a 360 approach rather than just like, oh, how can I change my diet? And honestly, sleep, I think, has been a sensitive topic for me for a long time, because I used to work on breakfast shows for about 7 years where I was getting up at 4 a.m. or before 4 a.m. and it became such a thing. But it's not until now, I've been out of it for quite a while, where I realized how much it was affecting me. And it's all linked, isn't it? Because if you're not sleeping, you don't really exercise, so you're not feeling great, and then you have cravings. So I'd get home and just all day be craving like carbs and sugar, and it was because I was always so tired. So now, like, having seen the other side of it, I can totally get why fundamental things like just getting 8 hours sleep can transform your life in so many different ways.
Yeah, we need like between 7 to 9 hours of restorative sleep, so kind of good quality sleep. And it can be really hard, as I mentioned, with PCOS and insomnia and sleep apnea, which is when your breathing stops and starts while you're sleeping. You can sound, to someone sleeping next to you, it can sound like you're gasping or choking during your sleep. And you might feel that you're really fatigued during the afternoon, like you're really tired, but you don't really know why, because you've slept supposedly 8 hours. So shift workers have quite a high level of that kind of some of those issues, and that would have been you because you're kind of waking up so early in the morning. So trying to time it so that you wind down in the evenings, that you have a good nighttime routine, and that you wake up and go to sleep at a consistent time every day. We know that early morning sunlight plays a massive role in regulating our body's internal clock. So I'll often say to my clients, before you start your workday, could you just go and sit in the garden with your breakfast for 10 minutes? Or if it's, right now we're in January, so could they bundle up and get out for a 15-minute walk and just put on a podcast or some music or just be with their thoughts? That can really help. It's really important to see natural light in the morning if you've got PCOS, but generally for health and overall. So I'm so glad you brought up sleep, because it's incredibly important for regulating our nervous system, for helping our hormonal health, and it's when all that repair and things goes on in our body. So it's underrated, definitely.
Absolutely. Well, we have to wrap it up soon. I feel like I could talk to you all day about this. So interesting. But just very quickly, what are a couple of the key sort of healthy habits that you try and introduce into your life on a daily basis?
So I'd say my top tip is to think about what you can add rather than subtract. So could you add in more plants into your day? So if you're currently having your breakfast, could you add in a handful of frozen blueberries to your breakfast, maybe a handful of mixed seeds? Could you keep a jar maybe on, in your fridge or on your kitchen island and top that up, use it as a salad topper perhaps. Could you swap one of the servings of animal protein for plant protein? We know that reduces mortality risk, and it doesn't need to be all or nothing, but swapping that chicken in your stir fry for tofu or tempeh is going to give you a great amount of protein as well as vitamins and minerals and other key nutrients. So that's kind of a really good one. Please don't fall for the keto and low carb crazes. We really do need carbohydrates in order to have healthy ovulation and to support our energy levels. The body, the brain really runs on carbohydrates. We need that fuel. We need to be fueling ourselves properly, especially if we're training and things, even more so. And I'd say build movement into your day. I'm not a natural gym bunny, so I try and stay active throughout my day, just little things that you can do, especially when you're sitting for long hours in your job. So try and build that in, and try and kind of think about alcohol in a really mindful way. I was someone that definitely drank far too much when I worked in public relations and marketing in the city, and found that in the pandemic it gave me a chance to shift some of my habits. So I'm incredibly mindful. I don't drink anymore, but it took a long time to kind of slowly cut things down. So finding easy swapping out an alcoholic drink for and building your community. There are incredible PCOS support groups online, but also so many other places where you can find community, whether it's a run club or a book club or other places in person. Just saying to someone, if you like someone, just say, hey, want to grab a coffee? And it can be daunting. I can be quite shy sometimes as well socially, but I have really close female friends, and I've really nurtured those friendships. And I think taking an interest in people and showing up for them, they'll show up for you, and let them know how they can. Say, I'd really love some support. Do you want to go to a yoga class together? Do you want to go and do this together? And often you'll be surprised at how much people are up for it. So
I love that so much. My favorite sort of date now with my friends is Reformer Pilates followed by brunch with a coffee and like a walk in the park. Like, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to all be about alcohol. And I think learning that is just so life-changing. Rohini, thank you so much. I've absolutely loved talking to you. So much amazing knowledge and wisdom. You really are a fountain of knowledge. So thank you for sharing that all with us. I'd love to know, so if anyone's interested in speaking to you for a consultation, where can they find you?
So they can book a free 15-minute call with me via a Calendly link on my website, so rohinibajekal.com. It's just my name. I'm also on social media at Rohini Bajekal, but I've got a Substack where it's called Full of Beans, and I love sharing top tips, recipes, kind of what I'm listening to, podcasts I'm loving, all of this kind of stuff around nutrition, health, well-being, hormonal health. So it's got literally everything. So do go and check that out. It's totally free to subscribe.
Amazing. I'm going to follow you. And we have your book just up there, Living PCOS Free, co-authored with your mother.
It really is for everyone, and if you do like it and you enjoy it, please do leave a review, because it really helps it be discovered and put out evidence-based information on hormonal health out there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.